My name is Holly Dixon, and I was 32 years old the day my family put me on trial. I walked into my parents' house expecting balloons, maybe a cake, something awkward but harmless. Instead, I stepped into silence. 200 people sat in rigid rows, facing forward, like a courtroom waiting for the verdict. Before I could speak, my mother began tearing my childhood photos off the walls, ripping them down one by one like evidence being erased. My father stood, cleared his throat, and read from a printed sheet. $400,000. That's what he said I owed them. Every dollar they claimed they had wasted raising me. My sister smiled as she slid my car keys out of my hand and whispered that Dad had already transferred the title. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I turned around and walked out without a word. 4 days later, they were calling me 80 times a day. I never picked up, and there's a reason for that. But before I explain what really happened, let me take you back to where this began. Growing up in the Dixon family, I learned early that there were two categories of children, Megan and everyone else. My father, Richard Dixon, built his real estate empire from nothing. He spoke in numbers, square footage, profit margins. My mother, Patricia, used to be a teacher, but she traded classrooms for dinner parties and status games the moment she married him. And then there was Megan, 4 years younger, beautiful, untouchable, the golden child. When I was 16, I earned a full scholarship into a pre-med program. I stood on that stage, scanning the crowd, waiting to see my parents' faces. They weren't there. Megan had a ballet recital. My mother told me later it was more important, never looking up from her phone. When I graduated top of my class from nursing school at 22, my mother sighed and said, if only I'd studied business like Megan, my father would finally have a successor. It didn't matter that Megan dropped out 2 years later. It didn't matter that I was working ICU shifts while she burned through credit cards. In their eyes, Megan was flawless. I was invisible. I learned the rules early. Love in this family was conditional, and I never met the conditions. So I stayed quiet. I shrank myself. I kept the peace. Everyone except one person. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the only one who ever saw me. When I told her I wanted to be a nurse instead of joining my father's company, she held my hands and told me caring for people was the most honorable work there was. 3 years ago, she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. My parents talked about caregivers. Megan suggested a nursing home. I quit my job that week. I moved into Grandma's small house on the edge of town and spent 3 years measuring her medication, holding her hand through the worst nights, reading to her when pain stole her sleep. Megan visited twice. My parents came once a month, stayed half an hour, and always left early. But Grandma and we had something real. She taught me that strength wasn't about fighting back. It was about knowing your worth when everyone else forgets it. She passed quietly 6 months ago, my hand in hers. At the funeral, my mother pulled me aside and said, "Don't act like you sacrificed so much. It's not like she left you anything." I didn't answer. I didn't know yet how wrong she was. A week before my birthday, Megan called me. She never called. Her voice was too sweet. She asked if I'd received anything from a lawyer about Grandma's estate. Then she mentioned a surprise birthday party. The whole family, for me. In 32 years, they had never thrown me a birthday party. My best friend Danny warned me. People don't change overnight, he said. They just get better at hiding intentions. I ignored him. I wanted to believe. 3 days later, my Aunt Ruth cornered me in a grocery store. She told me the truth. Megan and her husband had lost nearly $200,000 in a crypto scheme. They were drowning in debt. My father was scrambling for money, and they were talking about Grandma's estate, about a house. That night, I checked my mailbox for the first time in weeks. Beneath the junk mail was a cream-colored envelope from a law office. It was addressed only to me. The letter requested my presence to discuss the estate of Eleanor Mitchell. I sat in the dark, shaking, realizing the pieces didn't fit by accident. I decided to go to the party anyway, but not blind. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I thought about every birthday forgotten, every insult swallowed, every time I stayed silent to keep the family together. And I understood the truth. Every time I kept the peace, I erased myself. The next evening, I pulled into my parents' driveway wearing a navy blue dress, Grandma's favorite color. Cars lined the street, too many. I texted Danny, "Something's wrong." He told me he was nearby. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside and froze. Rows of chairs filled the living room, 200 of them, every seat occupied. No balloons, no cake, just faces turning toward me. And in that moment, I realized this was never a birthday party. It was a sentence. Megan appeared at my side, her smile stretched too wide, too rehearsed. "You made it," she said brightly. "Everyone's waiting." Waiting for what? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She didn't answer. She just tightened her grip on my arm and steered me forward. I asked about the cake. She said, "Later." Her nails dug into my sleeve as the crowd silently split open to let us pass. No one wished me happy birthday. No one even smiled. Then she let go, and I was alone at the end of a long table, 200 faces staring straight at me. My father stood and lifted a microphone, the kind used for wedding speeches. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Tonight, our family needs to address a serious matter." His eyes locked onto mine. "For 32 years," he said, "he and my mother had raised me, fed me, educated me, given me everything." I tried to speak, but he cut me off. The room was silent. No coughing, no shifting, not even breathing. He pulled out a thick stack of papers and held them up like evidence. A detailed accounting, he called it. Every dollar they'd spent on me since birth. Food, medical bills, school supplies, gifts, everything. He flipped to the final page and tapped the number at the bottom. $400,000. Gasps rippled through the room. 400,000, he repeated, his voice hard. Wasted on a daughter who turned her back on this family. I told him I hadn't turned my back on anyone. He ignored me. He said I had two choices: repay every cent or sign away my claim to my grandmother's house. My blood went cold. He slid a document across the table and told me to sign it. That's when my mother stood. She walked to the wall of family photos, the wall I'd grown up staring at, generations of framed memories. She pulled down the first picture, me at 5 years old, smiling. 32 years of raising an ungrateful child, she said, and ripped it in half. The sound tore through me. She grabbed another, my graduation, another rip, another photo, another accusation. Then she reached for the one that made my chest seize. Me and my grandmother, taken the week before she died. She tore it apart and let the pieces fall at her feet. 200 people watched. No one moved. No one objected. Then Megan reached into my purse. She lifted my car keys and smiled. "Dad transferred the title," she said. "I need it more than you." I looked at my family, at the torn fragments on the floor, at my father's shaking hands on those papers, at my sister clutching my keys, at 200 relatives who watched my erasure like it was entertainment. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I breathed. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. "You are enough." I looked at my father and asked him one simple question. Had he actually read my grandmother's will? He hesitated, said he didn't need to, that the house was supposed to go to the family. I told him calmly that assumptions don't hold up in legal documents. Doubt flickered across his face. From the back of the room, my aunt gave me a barely visible nod. I turned to Megan and asked how much she owed. Her face drained of color. I said the word crypto. The whispers started. Chairs shifted. My mother tried to redirect the blame onto me, but I stopped her. This wasn't about selfishness. This was about trying to steal something they hadn't even verified was theirs. I refused to sign. I told them I wouldn't make legal decisions under public humiliation. My father slammed his hand on the table and said if I didn't sign, I was no longer a member of the family. I touched the bracelet on my wrist, my grandmother's, and slipped it into my pocket. They didn't deserve to see it. I said clearly that I wouldn't let them erase me. Then I turned and walked out. No one followed. No one apologized. 200 people sat in silence. Danny was waiting at the end of the block. I got into the car and stared straight ahead. I wasn't okay, but I would be. I didn't know it yet, but leaving that house was the best decision I'd ever made. By morning, my phone was flooded. Calls, messages, accusations. I turned it off. Danny made coffee and sat with me without asking questions. That afternoon, I opened my grandmother's memory box and found a letter addressed to me. In it, she told me she'd prepared for this, told me to trust her lawyer. The next morning, I sat across from him. He told me my grandmother had left the house to me. Only me, worth over $600,000. Free and clear, I whispered. But my father said, the lawyer shook his head. Your father assumed. Whitmore leaned back in his chair and sighed. He admitted my father had never actually read the will. He'd assumed my grandmother would split everything evenly, the way people like him expect the world to work. But she didn't. She knew exactly who deserved it. Then he told me there was more. My chest tightened as he explained the clause my grandmother had included. If any family member tried to threaten or pressure me into giving up my inheritance, they would permanently lose any claim to her remaining assets. He smiled faintly and said my grandmother had been very thorough. Before I could respond, the office door opened. I turned and saw my aunt standing there, Ruth. Her expression was gentle, sad, and relieved all at once. She sat beside me and explained that my grandmother had asked her to be there when this moment came. She'd been present when the will was written. She knew everything. I asked her why she never told me. She squeezed my hand and said my grandmother made her promise. She wanted me to feel loved for who I was, not for what I might inherit. She knew I was the only one who stayed for her without expecting anything in return. That's when it hit me. Everything my family had done, every accusation, every threat, had been built on an assumption, a lie they told themselves. My grandmother had seen it coming and protected me anyway. I cried then, not from pain, but from relief. By the second day after my birthday, the calls turned frantic. I turned my phone on just long enough to count them. Dozens from my parents. One long voicemail from my sister, her voice shaking as she claimed there'd been a mistake. The texts followed. Misunderstanding, confusion, please call. I showed them to Danny and laughed, hollow and sharp. Funny how it became a misunderstanding only after they lost. On the third day, they showed up at my door. All three of them stood in the hallway like a delegation. I didn't invite them in. My father spoke first, softer now. My mother apologized, claiming emotions got the better of her. I reminded her she tore my photos off the wall in front of 200 people. Megan stepped forward and admitted she was in trouble, that she needed help. I told her calmly that her choices weren't mine to fix. My father insisted the house belonged to the family. I told him my grandmother disagreed, and she put it in writing. Then his phone rang. I watched his face change as the voice on the other end spoke loudly enough for all of us to hear. A relative. Furious. She said everyone knew what they'd done, that they'd tried to humiliate their own child for something that was never theirs, that no one was on their side anymore. The call ended. Silence filled the hallway. I told them they should leave. My father apologized then. Truly apologized, or at least tried to sound like it. I asked him one question. Was he sorry for what he did, or sorry because everyone found out? He didn't answer. That told me everything. My mother begged, my sister accused. I stayed calm. I told them I wasn't abandoning family. I was done being erased. Then I closed the door. On the fourth day, I returned to Whitmore's office and made my decision. I would keep the house, not sell it. I would live there, care for it, preserve the place where my grandmother and I had shared something real. I signed the papers with steady hands. Then Whitmore mentioned the car. My father had no legal right to transfer it. The car was mine, bought with my money, registered in my name. The transfer was invalid. I could get it back. For the first time in days, I almost smiled. As I signed the final document, I asked if my grandmother had ever spoken about my family near the end. Whitmore paused, then told me she'd said they wouldn't understand, but that I would, and she was right. 4 days earlier, I'd walked out of my parents' house, stripped of everything they thought defined me. 4 days later, I stood with my name on a home built on love, not conditions. They tried to put me on trial. They thought I'd beg. They thought I'd fold. Instead, I walked away, and that's when I finally won. Will, and that's enough. My eyes burned as I nodded. She really did know them. She knew all of them. Whitmore smiled gently and said that was exactly why my grandmother made the choices she did. I left his office with the deed in my hands and something I'd never felt before. Peace. The battle was over. What came next was healing. Within a week, the fallout spread far beyond my front door. 200 people had witnessed my public humiliation, and families talk. They talk faster when there's scandal. Aunt Ruth kept me updated. Friends my parents had known for years suddenly stopped calling. Dinner invitations disappeared. People didn't need explanations. They'd seen enough. My father's business took the hardest hit. Reputation had always been his currency. One longtime client walked away from a major deal after hearing what happened at my birthday. He didn't want to work with someone who treated family that way. My mother's social circle collapsed just as quietly. After decades on a charity board, she was removed. They told her they needed members who aligned with their values. I didn't feel victorious hearing any of it, just tired. Danny said something that stuck with me. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't told my side. They'd invited 200 witnesses all on their own. The truth didn't need help. My silence said everything. Megan's consequences were more personal. A month later, Ruth told me she and her husband had sold their house. The debt finally caught up with them. They moved back in with my parents. I tried to feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt empty. My mother blamed everyone, especially me. She told people that if I'd shared the inheritance, none of this would have happened. Ruth and I both knew it wouldn't have saved Megan anyway, but admitting that would have required accountability. Ruth asked me if I regretted it. I thought carefully. I regretted that nothing I did had ever been enough for them, but I didn't regret standing up for myself. Not anymore. She told me my grandmother would be proud. I hope so. 2 weeks later, I got my car back. Whitmore handled everything. The transfer was invalid. The car was mine, bought with my money, registered in my name. A police officer came with me to retrieve it. I expected another confrontation, another scene. Instead, the house looked smaller, less powerful. Megan answered the door. She looked exhausted, older somehow. She handed me my keys without a word. I thanked her, and for a brief second, something flickered in her eyes. Regret, maybe. Then it hardened, and she walked away. I didn't see my parents. I didn't want to. As I walked to my car, Ruth stepped out and asked if I was okay. I looked at the house I'd grown up in, the windows I used to stare out of, dreaming of escape. I told her I was learning how to be okay. She smiled and said that was enough. Driving away, I realized getting my car back wasn't about transportation. It was about reclaiming what was mine, including my dignity. A month later, I moved into my grandmother's house. It felt quiet, safe, like a deep breath. I kept the things that mattered, her chair by the window, her tea set, the bird feeder she'd filled every morning. I changed a few things too, making space for both of us. Once I was settled, I sent one final message to my parents. I took hours writing it. I told them I didn't hate them, but I couldn't continue being treated like I didn't exist. That if they ever wanted a real relationship, one not based on money or control, they knew how to reach me. Until then, I needed distance. I never got a reply. In the weeks that followed, I built a new life. Danny came over every Saturday. Ruth visited on Sundays. My coworkers became real friends. I wasn't alone. I just had a different kind of family now. One evening, I stood on my grandmother's porch watching the sunset and whispered that I was figuring it out. 3 months later, I sat in that same spot, holding her last letter. The paper was worn from rereading, but the words were still clear. Live like you deserve to. For most of my life, I'd waited for my family's permission to matter. I'd stayed quiet to keep their peace. It took being publicly disowned to finally understand the truth. I never needed their permission. That's what my grandmother really left me. Not a house, permission to choose myself, and that was enough.